Hello my lovely subscribers and viewers, welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here, welcome also. Today we're reading chapter 2 from My Father's Son Johnson by c.everald. Reflections. In the next few days, Father and I worked feverishly getting the cabin in readiness as a residence. No more than 14 feet by 9. Father thought it was much too small, so we began to add another 2 rooms, one for me and the kitchen. We didn't have running water and never would, but we would be comfortable. Gradually, I would get to like it immensely. The bush was all around us, and I was belly to belly with nature, and by the twitter, I knew there were birds galore. The river was never far away. Within 2 weeks we had the place completed, and Father went out and bought paint, and we both painted it. The place consisted of 5 acres of good river bottom land, and another 5 acres of hillside. Father, who had neglected this rich land, now turned his attention to working it. I only hoped he wouldn't do anything as foolish as to borrow money on it, because we could get along without risking loans. He began to put in bananas and vegetables such as cabbage, tomatoes, and callaloo, and also pineapples. He was preparing a place for a few yams. Everything seemed hunky-dory for a while, until school reopened in January, and I faced the realities of our misfortune. On the first day I rode marble to school, and although I thought what a good thing it was for me to be the only boy in that school to arrive on a horse, I found it was not so at all. Sure, I was the only one, but that made me odd instead of being important. At another time, a boy would have been cheered to have ridden a horse into the schoolyard. His cronies would have gathered round to touch the animal, to speak to it and ask questions of its rider. But now, since it was Rammy Johnson in shadow of his father's failure, I was dared. They gathered round all right, but it was to laugh. A boy in my village never rode on a saddle. He rode bareback, but they laughed at that too. "Where's your saddle, old man?" they said. "You're too poor to afford one." And they laughed again. I didn't answer, I didn't cry. I knew I shouldn't cry, but it was hard. I sat there on Marble's back with them around me, saying every conceivable thing against me. I saw Arlene, followed hard by Brad, duck into the school. Ashamed now of their brother, Rammy, the outcast as his father. Why were they ashamed? That alone steeled me. I slid from Marble's back and tethered her along, so she could eat grass while she waited. A train of them followed me, but somebody behind, it sounded like Collie Rayner, said, "Leave him alone, you bunch of fools." Collie was respected among all the boys, so my train got smaller. The school bell buzzed 9 o'clock, and we all went in. It was my worst day school ever. I couldn't do my work nor answer a sensible question. Miss Fletcher, my home form teacher, was appalled at my ignorance. I couldn't tell the history teacher who Christopher Columbus was, nor could I tell her the capital of my country, my own country, and on top of that I got all my mathematics wrong. For every mistake I made, my classmates laughed. It wasn't that they wanted to laugh. It was that they were supposed to. They didn't care about Father. It was for me that they did what they were doing. Because I had stuck with Father, everybody thought that now was the time that he should be deserted for good. Because I was identifying with him. That, and only that, made them laugh. For often when I met Arlene and Brad on the road, I noticed how tender everyone was to them. Nobody seemed to even look at them directly for fear that such a look could have been misconstrued. They went out of their way to play with them or to upgrade friendships with them. Me, they despised. And it wasn't difficult to understand who wants to be on the side of a loser. Who but Rami Johnson? For they all, almost a man in the village, now depended on Jake Ibbotson for their life, the big rich godfather of the village. He now the sole pursuing operator. For although the people had farms of their own, they were small, hardly viable plots, good enough for turning out their food supply with a surplus for penny earning income. But they had to work for Jake to supplement their earnings. He had the work and the money to pay for it, and now with father's farm he had more work. The two shops were his too. How he had come by them could have been in the same way Wiley, where he had obtained our farm. Though that was something I didn't know for sure. But he had them and the people went there to spend their weekly wages, and Jake was now the holder of a vast monopoly. As a matter of fact, everybody was supposed to hold us in derision, just because of that. Because if they were sympathized with us for being Rami Johnson and his father, Jake could have been angry, and Jake must not be angry. Miss Fletcher, my form teacher, was far from being pleased with me either. Not necessarily because of the fact that my schoolwork on that day was so rotten, but perhaps because Jake was the chairman of the school board, and nobody wanted to jeopardize his or her job at that time like that. Perhaps too, being such a rich man, and still unmarried, he was a good potential husband. Jake must have been 45 or 8 at, but so what? Miss Fletcher was brushing close on 35, and the only one on the staff excepting Ma who was unmarried. Yes, Jake was quite eligible. For why there were so many women getting dressed up and walking by his house for no reason, except that they must have wanted to put themselves on the market. He was a desired man, but by no means desirable, sought like gold, yet not possessing an ounce of charm. He was so stiff as wood and cold without life. He was a cashier at work, thinking money and nothing else in this wide world. Apart from his owning the Jaguar, he didn't live well. Not that I knew of. His house was scarcely better than a cabin, a small white L-shaped building. From the outside, the prettiest part of it was the veranda with its quaint rails and climbing ivy plants. Our farmer house at Robin Hill was a palace to his, and was better furnished as well. This must have been one of the reasons why father had failed, because he spent so much on things to make us happy, things which other people did not care much about. Fathers always cared about us, too much in fact. Whenever he returned from town, he brought us new clothes for extended happiness and candy for a temporary one. And for Ma, it was a big kiss and something nicely wrapped up in a box, the personal one, and something else for the house, but something which she had always wanted. That was how father had lived. But father was more lavish than that. His generosity extended beyond our walls. At one time he was the village's big shot. Then he possessed most of the best lands, and the finest cows and mules, and he alone was capable of loading 4 trucks full of bananas on banana day, and he had yams which he could sell 5 tons at a time, and sugarcane as well. There were mangoes and coconuts on his farm, and all kinds of non-cultivated things, such as jackfruit and avocado, pears, and people came and helped themselves to them. They eat, of course. They'd go up in the early morning and fill their baskets of mangoes, or pick up the coconuts which had fallen ripe to the ground, and sell them and make a few shillings. They did this, and when he caught them, father would say, "Look here, don't you know not to do that, to ask me first?" And they said, "Mr. Johnson, sir, I won't do it again. I beg you, sir." And he let them go. That was the only time, to my knowledge, that I heard them affix Mr. to his name. For them he was always Son Johnson, and my father never minded, for laughingly he would say, "There's no Mister to my birth certificate, but what am I getting is that they called him Mister only when they wanted him to be lenient, more lenient to them than he already was. They knew better than call Jake anything, but Jake or Mr. Ibbotson, because you'd hold it as a grudge against them. Jake was a wolf for prestige and power. They knew even better than that, never to go on his farm, seeking, or rather stealing his mangoes, or much worse, his coconuts. For he had slapped a few in jail for it too, and people respect that. The funny thing though was that they came to father's property on their raids, but when they had some money to spend, they bought it from Jake. Father never changed though. Ma complained without result. All father said was, "They only let themselves down acting like that." And Ma would rage, "While Jake gets rich and they plunder you?" And father, "So what the hell's money? It isn't life, is it?" Ma was right. Jake was getting and had got rich. Father was right too. Money isn't life, though I must concede that it is an important part of it. Too important a part of it. People would tie their animals on our farm too. They'd sneak in at night and tether them to eat our grass, which wasn't bad for what is grass. But sometimes the animals pulled up their sticks and ate things other than grass, such as our crops, and if father caught them, he'd pardon the owners. Jake, he impounded a few animals and had them sent to town, to which the owners had to charge the distance and pay the pound fee to get them back. And sometimes too, if they had eaten Jake's crops, there'd be an official valuation, and they would have to pay plant by plant. After a few penalties like those, they stayed away from his place like it was a plague. Yet these accumulated kindnesses on father's part could not have lost him his property. It was more than that. There were bigger things. He seemed to have lost his knack with money. Having found himself wealthy, he thought he should have been Father Christmas right through the year. Workers did poor jobs and he excused them. Alas, there were men on the payroll who were in other places and father didn't know what his supervisors were up to. When he began to realize his loss of grip on things, he began to gamble, to lose it fast and to borrow again. No man gets more desperate than a gambler who loses, because he is always trying to win his losses back, but only adding to them, and he forsakes his duties. Ma had talked her throat hoarse, but it was no good, so she left him, got a temporary separation. I think it was what she meant, just to shake him up. But father went down faster. He couldn't take that, his wife having left him, Son Johnson, coming to that. He gave up. He was utterly lost, and what was intended to have been a surgical separation began to look like a permanent thing. For Ma took a job at the high school, maintaining herself, but she must have had a big reason for moving on to a divorce. She must have known about father's gambling and thought that was the last straw. For that was what she did. Divorced father on the basis of incompatibility. We had begun as a sham and had become a fact. What had begun as a sham had become a fact. Time was when he used to lend Jake money. In those days, Jake was down. He'd come up to the house, Ma said, and lie about something such as his relatives in another part of the country being in trouble or of some sort, and father would lend him money. He needed to bail them out. Jake would disappear for a day or two, but he didn't go near any relatives because he didn't have any. And the next thing they knew, Ma said, was that Jake became the proud owner of a piece of land in the village, bought with father's money, which he had lent without interest or terms. And it took them some time to catch on to what Jake was up to. So Jake came up fast. Father was indeed a funny man. He was the only big farmer who had any time for people, especially people like boys. But father had grown up like any other boy in the village on a farm, having fished in the rivers and ridden animals barebacked and whittled wood and made things out of it, such as tops, and when he grew up he was still boy-like. He made things for boys, fish pots and tops, and some of them were afraid to approach him, needed me to ask him to make something for them. He did. He'd sit up late at night and do them. Ma was always cross, but father didn't mind at all. He'd pick us up all on the road, as many as 10 boys squeezed into the car, and he'd ask, "Where you boys want a ride to?" And the resounding unanimous answer, "Anywhere, Mr. Sanson." And he'd do it driving along the river road, then up the steep pomade hill, so that we fell back and watched the top of the wood angling up. Or you drive us across a fresh cut sugarcane field, tippled with stumps, twisting and cavorting across the wide open spaces, guffawing more than a hyena. Father was that kind and crazy too. He'd enter the Christmas garden party contest, much to Ma's chagrin. "You're a big man now, Merton," she always called him that. "So what? You ought to be an example in the village," meaning to act more proper and like a responsible man, as if you are the owner of Robin Hill and not a worker on it. "Look here, Debbie, what you want me to do? Stop living?" Say to myself, I am the owner of Robin Hill, and as such I am no longer flesh and blood as those poor brutes out there. No, ma'am, I won't say it. My God, I have always thought people have created impossible roles for parsons and teachers, and here you are extending the same to me. Does this really make me less of a man if I don't do what I like to do? People respect seriousness in a man, Merton. People are damned, he'd say, and he'd enter anyway. Ma couldn't stop him. Not anything barring illness could stop him, and to my knowledge he was never sick. He'd enter the bareback mule and donkey funny races, in which you rode facing the animal's tail, and he'd shoot at the bull's-eye for a ham leg like any other man, lying on his belly and squirming into the ground for a better position, the gun powing, and he jumping up splinter-faced with laughter and running down to look at the bull's eyes saying, "Oh me, oh my," the happiest times of his life. And better still, or maybe worse, he was a member of the John Cano dancers, who masqueraded in various costumes at Christmas time, dancing for money, cavorting to the quick bam boom 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 of the drum. As a matter of fact, he was the one who organized the dancers to ensure the survival of the culture, he said. Ma thought that was the last straw, but father found us children. Maybe only father and I thought it was fun. He was one of the best dancers too, and it was magical to hear him cracking the whip and saying, "Ooh la la, give me money, ooh la la, give me money." He was not merely on the cricket team, but he was the captain. People were always fascinated by him. He was an eccentric. If you had money, if you were important, you weren't supposed to do these things. He had money, he was important, and he did them and was accepted. He was liked. For everybody, he was Sonson Johnson. He was so much fun, perhaps too much, trusting everyone and being exploited by just about everyone. It didn't even seem to have bothered him, their exploitation of him. "Ha," he'd say, "people like those are not better than animals, and if you retaliate, then you become one of them." And all this time that Ma was criticizing father, she was abusing Jake. She said father was a soft-hearted fool. To Jake, she referred to as Rick, which wasn't a bad name, considering that it rhymed with Jake, and he was tall and slim too, and his teeth were a bit scattered around in his mouth. So judge how surprised I was when at the end of our first week at River Bottom, I stopped to see Ma and Harleen and Brad at their house to say hello. I knew she'd be happy to see me as I to see her. I mean, we saw each other at school, but some visiting has to be done at home to make it family-like. And although she had a divorced father, I had nothing against Ma. She was as good a mother as could be. Better than most, and the fact that I had stayed with father was no indication that I bore ill will against her. It was just that I wished to be with father, that I thought it was the right thing to have done. But as I was saying, I stopped by at Ma's house, and surprise of surprises, Jake was there. Not businesslike and hawked nose, but relaxed, sitting in a rocking chair that was once father's favorite. We were both frightened, he and I, and Ma was uncomfortable. He was the first to recover. Well, well, he said, resuming his mocking. If it isn't Rami. Say hello to Mr. Hibbeson, Rami, Ma said. I looked searchingly at her. Where was her this day now? But then I remembered he was chairman of the school board, a bird whose feathers you didn't ruffle unnecessarily. If you were on the teaching staff, for the first time, I saw through Ma. Ambition had made her act in this strange way, made her put the pressure on father to be an example in the village. Then, when that failed, she effected a separation, a catalyst. But with father, that failed too. Frustrated, she got the divorce. Ambition, I hate you. Ma said, say hello to Mr. Hibbeson. But instead of greeting him orally, I nodded. I was afraid I would have said rake. Mr. Hibbeson and I are just talking, Ma said somewhat apologetically, about school and things. Jake was smiling, rocking and smiling. With his pit helmet off, he looked different. His hairline had receded, and without the hat, he had that brushed, sleek, lizardly look. I didn't like him. Ma looked at me, then at Jake. I have been trying to persuade Rami to come and live with me, but no luck so far. Why don't you, young man? Jake said. I didn't look at him. I looked at Ma. No, ma'am, I said. I'll stay with father. Jake said. A chip off the old block. I didn't know how he meant it, complimentarily or in a derogatory way, but I didn't care. Here, Ma said, rising, have some milk and a piece of cake. I am not hungry, Ma. Yet I was hungry, but disgusted more than hungry. She came back and sat down. Rami has become so impossible, she said to Jake. He is so cold to me, but the Lord knows I tried. Adding, his father's poisoned him against me. Jake was smiling, no wider, no narrower. I was surprised to have heard Ma say that too. The thing about father, he wouldn't open his mouth against her. He wouldn't in any little way harm Ma. He loved her, but maybe she didn't mean it. It was one of those cases in which she had to say something. She was just acting out a part. She had gone to a place of no return and was just obeying something like fate. Having known that she had made the first move, she was too embarrassed to go back to father now. But I was sure that she still loved him. Or why in her guarded way was she always asking about him? Pride, pride, pride. Just as bad as a thing as gambling. It was gambling that had made father sink that fast, and this wretched pride of Ma's had stifled her love for a good man, a truly good one at heart. Two lost souls, really. Both Harleen and Brad appeared in the kitchen door with milk stains and cake crumbs around their mouths. I joined them in the kitchen, and they sat down again. Arlene was 12 and Brad 10. Arlene cut me a piece of cake, and to be frank, I hid it for a hole in it before I turned it down flatly. Jake's presence upset me. Arlene said, "You're such a fool." She said it in such a dainty way, but it didn't even sound bad. After a time she went on, "Come and stay with us, boob." "I can't," I said. "Father needs me." "Needs you," she said. "What about Ma?" She has you and Brad, I said. Brad looked up momentarily, but he was far too busy with his cake and milk to mind me or join Arlene in persecuting me. If, of course, he knew the fine points of persecution. What is he doing here? I whispered to Arlene, jerking my head to indicate Jake. He just dropped by. First time? No, maybe once before. He's really okay, Rami. He gave Brad and me a ride back from school in his Jaguar. It's so nice to ride in it. Brad showed some interest at last, using his arms as around a steering wheel and making revving sounds with his mouth. It's a first-class car, he said. Lots of power. It was too much for me. It seemed that both of them meant to put some kind of pressure on me. But how could they like this? Riding the car of the man who had dispossessed their father, and was now feeding them sugar. But then I thought kindly, they were too small to understand. Arlene looked into my face boldly. There was this about her boldness. She was pretty too. I liked her fine features, swimming black eyes, and chiseled mouth. Some day she would make some man a fine wife. Fine, but a great nagger. Do you miss me, Rami? Sure I do. And Brad? Yes, yes, is there any doubt? And Ma? What a foolish question. Then come to us. We miss you too. Ma cries for you. I cry for her too. You cry? A boy? Foolish girl, I said. Then come live with us. We didn't mind too much when you were at Robin Hill, but River Bottom... Shut up, Arlene. I can't do it. Mr. Jake, don't tell me anything about him. I don't want to hear anything about him. You don't like him? Should I? You're too young anyhow to understand. I rose to go, aiming to slip out by the back way rather than confront Jake again. At the back door, Arlene maliciously said, Guess what we're having for supper? Pork chops all garlicky. She knew how much I liked pork chops especially. Ma's way, the juicy way, the garlicky way with mushroom sauce. That was why she said that. I left without looking back. For supper we had codfish and hacky. Not a bad dish, but compared to pork chops, codfish was pretty poor fare. It was well done though, and the yam was good. I had been pretty miserable since I had left the house, but had managed to keep it out of my conversation with father. I kept everything pertaining to him and Ma out of our conversations, but I guess it was what Arlene said about their supper which made me decide to get this thing off my chest. I stopped at Ma's this afternoon, I said. Good, father said. How are they? Fine. And your Ma? Fine. Jake was there, rocking in a chair. Your chair! With a fork tipped with ackee laced with codfish, poised between his plate and mouth. Father looked up. Who? Jake, sir. Oh? He slowed down in his eating. I guess he didn't want to eat anymore, but kept up the show for my benefit. I goaded him. You think Ma actually likes him? I don't know, Rami. Why shouldn't she? He's a person. I mean really likes him. Not in the Christian way, but really likes him after what he's done to you. I don't know what you mean, son. I mean, sir, she didn't even seem to be angry at him. Said they were talking about school math business. But so what? She should have been a bit more clipped. Know what I mean, father? Well, she was calling him Mr. Ibbotson. But to my mind, she should have gone farther and said, Yes, Mr. Ibbotson. No, Mr. Ibbotson. He looked too comfortable to me. He should have been on the veranda on his wretched school business or something like that. Your mother is politer than that, Rami, father said, putting down his fork. Yes, sir. Jake's kinder than I thought, he said after a while. Maybe he was there to console her. That's what I mean, sir. He seemed kinder than I thought. He seemed human. What do you mean? Father snapped. Nothing, sir. I knew that I had touched something in him. He had changed since I had begun to speak to him of Jake's being at the house, almost savagely, not like him at all. He rammed tobacco from a pouch into his pipe and jammed it just as savagely between his teeth and lit it. To speak the truth, the aroma of the tobacco was a relief. It seemed to clear the air of the heaviness, because it had become quite heavy. There was something mysterious which I had awakened, and the tobacco seemed to have removed it, or at least to have enlightened it. It must have done more though. It must have entered my head and made me a bit reckless, because for no sensible reason whatsoever, I said, "You think Ma aims to marry him?" "What, boy?" He snapped up from the chair, but his arms hung heavy and limp from his broad shoulders. "What?" he repeated. "Sorry, sir." And I was indeed sorry, for he was not just angry, he was afraid of what I had said. But I had to say it, for it had bothered me for better than 2 hours too. I saw the change in his face, the fear of something or other, something irrevocably would have taken place. Ma would be married to another man, then father could never win her back. Never have I found it shocking too. For the first time, my God, she'd be gone forever. Yes, father was afraid. If he must regain Ma, he would have to work fast, and yet I knew him, knew that it wouldn't look in Ma's direction even if he were pining. In his mouth the pipe remained forgotten, but his glassy eyes softened just as soon as he relaxed. Smiling, he sucked deeply on the pipe. "Sorry, son," he said, touching my head. He rubbed it fondly. Then he laughed his gurgling boyish laugh and said, "Aren't we silly, you and me?" "Yes, father." But he wasn't fooling me. "Come, let's wash up the dishes." We gathered the plates and washed them first, and then the pots, and all the while, if I got the chance, I looked at him in an attempt to read his face. I believed his thoughts were far away, but who was I to know for sure? Well, that's it for today, viewers. I hope you enjoyed the story. Thank you for listening, my lovely subscribers. Please tell a friend to subscribe and like. Thank you. Have a great day.